So Warhammer has somewhat of a reputation of being quite an expensive hobby, so let's talk through a whole bunch of tips and tricks for how you could build a Warhammer army on the cheap. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're all about tactics and strategies for getting a Warhammer 40k collection together just that little bit cheaper. In the video we'll talk about buying Warhammer kits in general, 5 strategies that you can use to save a lot of money when you are acquiring miniatures, and then run through what I think is a cheap and practical idea for getting a Space Marine army off the ground for a relatively low cost. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight into it, and talk about assembling a Warhammer 40k army without breaking the bank. First up, when you're planning on getting a collection together, I would bear in mind that some armies, units and options are going to be far more expensive than other ones, and it could be quite a big factor in what you choose to start painting up. In general, Games Workshop's newer plastic sculpts do tend to be a bit more expensive than their older things, and when you're buying stuff you could certainly compare the amount of money that it would cost for the amount of points that you get on the table, as that's how much a proportion of the army that your choice will fill. Just comparing one of the worst and best examples around, if you're looking at troops for 2 different armies, Genestealer Cult Acolyte hybrids would cost you $40 or £25 for a box. You could equip them with some fancy mining weapons, but if you were just running them stock, then they could just cost you as little as 40 points. It means in theory if you wanted to build up a massive horde of these, it would cost you literally $1,000 for 1,000 points of these. If you can compare that to the Hyper Elite Custodes, and you look at their basic troops choice, the Custodian Guard, if you spend $60 or £35, you get around about 250 points of miniatures, and it could potentially be quite a lot more than that if you do choose to assemble some of them as, say, Vexillers or Captains. Even if you just assemble them as base troops though, then it would just cost you $240 for 1,000 points worth of these. So if you're looking to fill out an army with a whole bunch of basic troops, the Custodes are going to cost you around about 4 times less than the Genestealer Cult for the same amount of points of army in-game. Obviously you'd be getting quite a lot more models for the Genestealers, but you'd basically need a lot more of them to make the army work in the first place. Just in general in 40k, the cheaper factions tend to be the more elite ones. For good cheap starter armies, you could think about Custodes, Imperial or Chaos Knights, Space Marines of most stripes, Chaos Marines, and maybe Necrons. On the other hand, a fair few factions are just quite a lot more expensive, particularly ones either with more recent plastic sculpts or just armies that are incredibly numerous and you need a ton of models. Astra Militarum, Admech, Adeptus Auroritas, and Genestealer Cult might be some of the most expensive factions around right now. In any case, as well as just acquiring a few kits, it might just make sense to draft up a very rough end goal list that you might want to get to, how much it might roughly cost from Games Workshop, and if there's any clever ways that you can use to bring the costs down that we'll discuss. Firstly, if you are just mainly looking to buy new and sealed Warhammer miniatures, there are basically 2 main ways that you can get decent discounts over and above just buying all the boxes of models separately. First of all, Games Workshop does offer some discounted kits themselves, either the Start Collecting line or the Combat Patrol line of discount boxes. There's also the starter boxes for Warhammer 40k in itself, which aren't too bad if you're collecting either Marines or Necrons. I'll leave a link down in the video description to my full review of the Start Collecting discount boxes. I've made a fairly recent one, uploaded just a couple of weeks ago. In any case, generally these will give you fairly decent savings compared with the standard Games Workshop boxes, the main disadvantage being that you don't really get so much choice of your models, you just get the ones in the box and you can't mix and match the exact ones that you like. In general, the savings tend to be around 30% to 40% of Games Workshop's main selling prices, so if you are collecting an army, it's almost always worth giving their value box a look. Most of the factions in the game do have one, the only ones that don't tend to be the armies that have quite a limited model line, things like Custodes, Harlequins, or the Knight armies. As well as that, there's also occasional limited deals from Games Workshop, often in the form of big box versus sets where you get 2 armies, things like Piety and Pain for Sisters vs Drukhari, the Indomitus starter set, or the Shadowspear box where it was Space Marines vs Chaos. Often these sell out really quite fast, but it's worth knowing if any of them are about to release at any point soon, as they can be another interesting way to get some savings. These can often be even better savings than the standard Start Collecting boxes, often around 40 to 50% if you're lucky. The other side of getting discounts on Warhammer miniatures is to use discount retailers. Across most of the world, there will be independent gaming stocks that stock Games Workshop products, and they will typically sell them at a cheaper price than Games Workshop itself. It's a bit of a strange arrangement, where buying the models through a smaller gaming retailer usually gives you around 10 or 20% off Games Workshop's prices. Personally, I pretty much always buy off these if I am buying new Games Workshop miniatures. Not only do you get the saving, but you can also be supporting your local gaming store as well. So I certainly think about seeking them out if you have any in your area wherever you are in the world. Element Games is one example in the UK, I'll leave a link to that down in the video description, and that one is an affiliate link that helps support the channel if you buy anything through it. There's plenty of other alternatives though: Leodis Games, The Outpost, Wayland Games, Goblin Gaming. All of these basically ship Warhammer 40k products throughout the UK at a very decent discount off Games Workshop's prices. I think most countries do tend to have their own discount retailers similar to this, so just give it a Google wherever you happen to be in the world. What feels really great is when you can buy the Combat Patrol boxes through one of these discount retailers, basically double dip on the savings, and you can wind up with the miniatures being around about half what they would have costed from Games Workshop if you bought them separately. There's plenty of other interesting and quite powerful alternatives though to just buying new miniatures directly, either from a shop or from Games Workshop themselves. Firstly, and perhaps one of the cheapest ways, would be the second-hand market. Warhammer miniatures often have a really big eBay market, and it's usually worth just checking them out before you buy a kit. Again, this will vary country to country, depending on where you're based in the world. Sometimes you might find people splitting up these big value boxes. Say if you only wanted one unit out of a big box that they've released, that can be a good way to get your hands on them. But I would really recommend second-hand eBay miniatures as a very cheap way of filling out your army. Even if the models have been assembled and painted, you can usually tell if they've been assembled too poorly or if they've been too caked and paid for your purposes. But there's plenty of good quality stuff out there at really good prices. If the paint's thin enough, I usually just tend to paint straight on over. With a nice paint job, I very rarely notice any real loss of detail, particularly if it's on more rank and file units that people aren't generally going to pick up and examine too closely. eBay was how I built up a really big Imperial Guard collection for very little to no money, usually tending to target really big collections that people were selling and then just reselling off the bits that I didn't want. I definitely recommend being able to resell on eBay. It allows you to convert anything that you don't want or feel like you're not going to use back into money that you can reinvest in the hobby. Warhammer miniatures certainly hold their value. Another recent and upcoming example for a savings opportunity are the Warhammer Conquest and Warhammer Imperium magazines. Their release dates are going to be a bit variable around the world. Warhammer Imperium is just starting its run in the UK, and I believe it's billed to be released early in the USA at the start of 2022. I believe the issues are either £9 or $12 each, and often come with far more than that value in terms of miniatures. If one of these release cycles does come out where you are, it's certainly worth trying to harvest a few issues if you are looking at Space Marines or Necrons. Getting a full squad of Aggressors or Scorpec Destroyers for just £9 is a very good way to supplement one of those forces. Next we have conversions and kit bashes. It's a great part of the hobby to get into, getting a little bit of plastic art and putting some bits together, and making something completely unique that no one else in the world has. It can pair very nicely with saving a little bit of money as well, and in particular character miniatures are one of the easiest ways to achieve this. Games Workshop usually does sell character miniatures at quite a premium. They might cost 5 times what you'd spend on a normal infantry figure, even though they're both models of the exact same size. If you can save any fancy bits and spares from other kits, you might well be able to kit bash some characters, use things like robed bodies, fancy backpacks or power weapons to make some commanders, and basically pay the same price you would have done for a normal infantry figure and not paying the Games Workshop character premium. Obviously I'm not saying that some characters aren't very nice looking indeed, but can be another way to save some money if you want to, and also make some faction leaders that are really your own. You might be able to scratch build some vehicles or upgrade some ones to have different turrets. Orcs in particular might be a good example of this. Their technology is all looted and scrapped together technology in the first place, so why not build your own mech guns or battle wagons with bits taken from other kits or models that are completely outside of the remit of 40k. I've shown these off on the channel a few times, but here are some of my Space Marine librarians kit bashed from the Dark Angels veteran kit, which is really quite a nice source of robed bodies and fancy power weapons, and a couple of scratch built mech guns, which are mainly plastic art with some Lego wheels with a whole load of Orky bits glued all over them, and a couple of Gretchen from the Gretchen kit. I'm sure there'll be so many other examples of these savings out there. They certainly won't work for everything, but if you do have the option to transmute a cheap kit into a more expensive one, then that could be another good saving. Next up, I'd remember that you don't necessarily have to buy from Games Workshop itself. There are many other miniature companies out there. Maybe a few of the more notable ones being things like Anvil Industries, Victoria Miniatures, and Cromlech, though there are of course many more. Lots of these guys like to make some very similar models to Games Workshop for various different factions, models that strongly resemble, say, Space Marines, Imperial Guardsmen, or Orcs, though with some slight different twists, and generally not named the same thing as the Games Workshop product, so as not to infringe on Games Workshop's IP. For example, here's a cool sculpt that looks sort of similar to an Imperial Guard Commissar from Anvil Industries. A lot of these might not be significantly cheaper than Games Workshop's miniatures, but they can be a good source for things like alternate Imperial Guard regiments that Games Workshop doesn't make anymore, certain weapon or turret upgrades, or even just stand-in miniatures where it doesn't make too much difference. Say maybe a horde of slightly more generic zombies that could stand in for Games Workshop's Poxwalkers. I would bear in mind for these that if you're actually wanting to play games in Games Workshop's actual stores or at their official tournaments, they're not going to be taking a very positive view of these, but if you just play at an independent gaming store, independent tournaments, or just round somebody's house, then these alternative miniatures work just fine. 3D printing is also becoming ever more prevalent, with a lot more people either owning one or knowing someone who does, and that can be another option for printing off some of your own alternative miniatures similar to the third-party ones, or ordering them in from someone who can. 3D printing can be quite nice for fiddly squad upgrades and things. Say for example, if you don't have enough of one type of special weapon, you could just print off a whole bunch of some sort of generic sci-fi energy weapon, and make it clear that say this one represents a plasma gun throughout your army. If you're consistent, and if it looks somewhat the part, very rarely is anyone going to mind, unless of course you go to a Games Workshop store or tournament. It can also be a really quite cool tool for customizing your army and making them your own, again with aesthetic details like fancy different alternative heads or bodies, and it can be quite a good way to get a whole bunch of terrain together as well, as that's quite a nice way to build up a generic battlefield that doesn't have to be too close to actual 40k. 3D printing is almost certainly going to be getting ever more prevalent into the future, so likely any opportunities that there are at the moment will be far more accessible in a few years' time. As well as just using a lot of different ways to save money though, I'd also bear in mind your own buying habits as a way that you could spend too much really quite easily. I think perhaps one of the main things with 40k is not to buy too much all at once, and usually acquiring and building up and painting a few small units tends to be more sensible in the long run than acquiring a lot of stuff that you don't really have quite enough time to build up and paint, and a kit might wind up sitting around in your house for months or years unopened, at which point it may as well have been back in the shop until that point, and you might as well have just deferred the decision to spend the money until far later down the line. It's very easy to get led astray with dreams of the next project after you've finished this one, but in general if you can try and operate a bit of self-control, it'll probably save you money in the long run. You can certainly resell anything that you don't wind up opening or using, but you're certainly likely to lose at least a little bit in the whole reselling process. In general, just when collecting 40k armies as a whole, I'd always bear in mind that rules can and do change, so ideally don't collect loads and loads of something that you hate the look and feel of. It's probably not going to feel like the most sensible purchase once the meta's wound up moving on. Finally, I thought we'd just round up with one idea for a fairly cheapish value Space Marine list. This one's a 2000 point army, though obviously I'd advise you not to go out and buy all of this all at once. Much better to start up with a small 500 point force or something, and then gradually expand from there as you see fit. This definitely isn't supposed to be any top tier tournament list or anything like that, just one example of a starter Space Marine army that would allow you to play full 2000 point games of 40k if you wanted to. The list is a single battalion of a fair variety of Space Marine units. We've got a Primaris Captain with a Storm Shield, a Librarian and a Phobos Lieutenant, 2 squads of 5 Infiltrators, 2 squads of 5 Intercessors, 1 squad of 5 Assault Intercessors, a couple of small units of Company Veterans, 3 Eliminators, 3 Suppressors, 3 Outriders, 10 Hellblasters, 3 Aggressors, an Impulsor with an Iron Hail Heavy Stubber and a Shield Dome, and then 2 standard Dreadnoughts armed with Multi-Melters. As to how we've put that little lot together, here's just a rough breakdown of how you might acquire those kits, employing a few of the different strategies. First up, for the kits that we're buying new, we've bought through a 15% discount gaming store, and we've gone with the Combat Patrol Vanguard Space Marines for £72 or $120. That gives us the Lieutenant, all the Infiltrators, the Impulsor, the Suppressors and the Eliminators. We've then gone with that Dark Angels Veteran kit for £17 or $28. We've used 2 of them in 2 small units of Company Veterans to protect our characters and hold down objectives, and then we've converted 1 Space Marine Librarian out of the kit, with the fanciest bits, a hooded head and a force weapon. We've then got the Elite Starter Set at £55 or $84. That's the one with Space Marines against Necrons. That gives us our Primaris Captain, the Assault Intercessors and an Outrider squad, and then it gives us a fair amount of Necrons as well, that we could either keep if we felt like it, resell on eBay for roughly either £18 or $28 once you've taken into account eBay fees and postage, but if we had the option it would be most sensible to split 50-50 with a friend. That would give you better value than reselling the other half of the box off eBay, I think. To fill out points, I've gone for a Hellblaster squad. They might not be the strongest models in game, but Plasma is really quite cool and fun, and in terms of money invested for the amounts of points that you get on the table, Hellblasters are one of the better choices out of the whole Space Marine army. They cost the same amount of Intercessors in money, but because they're armed with fancy guns, they're a lot more points. Finally, aside from the new kits, we've also scoured eBay for a few deals. Just a very quick eBay search in the UK brings up 10 standard intercessors for £22 after postage, which equates to around $35 US. I can see a fair few that I'd be happy to repaint straight over. I'm not really too bothered about the absolute highest standard of painting on my rank and file. Standard dreadnoughts also seem to go fairly well on eBay for a decent discount, so I picked up a couple of them. I can see a fair few options going for around about £20 each, including postage and packing, so that equates to around about £40 or $64 US. Finally, as that Imperium magazine is coming out in the UK at the moment, I'll look to jump on the one that has the aggressors in it, a £9 or $12 issue that nets us one of the squads of aggressors with the flamers. Obviously that's a bit opportunistic, but maybe just represents one deal that's available right at the moment. Opportunistic stuff like this would vary depending on where you are in the world and what Games Workshop is currently coming out with. Overall, after reselling the Necrons, we get an army that's worth around about £227 for 2,000 points, or around $366 US. I know that's hardly the cheapest price in the world, but like I said, I wouldn't be looking to buy all of this in one go. I'd buy up a kit or two, make and paint the models, play some games with them, and then move on to the next chunk if I want to, if and when the funds were available. I would also bear in mind that Warhammer does generally tend to hold its value, unlike quite a lot of other things that you might spend on other hobbies. Say if you wound up building this army, playing with it for a year or two, then dropping out of the hobby altogether, generally the army will still retain the vast majority of its value, and if you can spend a little bit of time either eBaying it or selling it to someone local, you should very easily be able to recover at least half the cost of this, and perhaps a fair bit more if you're smart about it, and if you've kept the models in somewhat good condition. So overall, I hope that's a little bit of food for thought for playing Warhammer a little bit cheaper. I'm sure there certainly isn't an all-encompassing list as well, so let me know any other ideas that you have down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the 40k Tactics videos coming, with some ideas for strategies both on the tabletop and when trying to put the models there in the first place. Finally, if you've enjoyed the video and you are looking to pick up cheap models in the UK, I would just like to mention my Element Games affiliate link, which I talked about earlier. That's down in the video description below. You get around 10 to 20% off Games Workshop's miniatures, and if you buy anything through there whatsoever, a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you any more at all. I thoroughly recommend them as they've always had decent customer service for me. Really quite a nice third-party retailer for anyone who's living in the UK. Otherwise, there's plenty of other stuff down there. Feel free to check out the Discord server, the channel Patreon. There's plenty of other things going on. In any case, thanks very much for listening. I wish you all the best in getting more miniatures on the table for cheap, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.